let's look at labor. This is a big one for Democrats. They've always kind of held themselves out as the party of the working man and of unions. This goes back all the way to World War II. The blue line is the share of the profits of American corporations that go to labor, people that work every day, right? All of us. The orange is the share that goes to the profits of major corporations. Think, in our area, right? GM and Ford. These days, a lot of the big tech companies, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, that are super profitable. So those are the ones that are getting all the profits today. So as you can see, back in the 40s, right? And you can think about historical events and think, oh yeah, so this is why that happened. After World War II, right, the rest of the world was in ruins. Unfortunately, a lot of Americans perished, on the shores of Europe trying to help them out. And as a result of that, when they came back, we had industry and no one else did, right? So people could ask for raises. So the percentage of profits or the percentage of total profits that went to labor versus the corporation went up, right? It was good for workers because they could negotiate wages and they could raise their wages. Then you could see after that, it started to go down, especially in the 60s. Those workers did not have that anymore. Japan, Europe, they were competitive again. And the US manufacturing was kind of faltering. So, in the late 60s. Then you can see unions kind of picked up a lot of steam in the early 70s, right? Actually, the peak of unionization in the US was 1979. So as unions started to pick up steam and inflation started to kick in, you started to remember the stagflation of the 70s for anyone that's heard that term? You start to see, people getting a larger cut of what their, the profit from their companies. Then, kind of goes up and down, but you can see from about the late 90s till today, it has been consistently lower. And today, this gap is as big as it's ever been. I'm not here to argue whether that's positive or negative, right? I don't think I'm even smart enough or qualified to make that decision. But I can tell you it is on the radar of Democrats. Biden specifically has talked about this. Certainly more of the left wing, think Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, and the group of the 4 House members, the female House members, the squad, I think they call themselves. More of the left wing, this is on their radar. They want this gap to close. And it's not impossible. As you can see, even, when you get recessions, like this was the big 08 recession, as you get recessions, that happens, and those things start to come down. So they are going to work, whether it's raising minimum wage, whether it's taxing corporations more and giving more generous benefits such as Social Security or unemployment to people. This is on their radar. They think this is basically the definition of income inequality, and they want to fix it. It's a major pillar of what they want to do. What I would say from a perspective of your portfolio, that is not necessarily the end of the world, right? If you tax corporations a little bit more, yeah, their profitability goes down. But then if that money goes to, the government and the government is spending it, and that money still goes around the economy 7 times, it's called the money multiplier. That in a consumer-based economy like we have is not bad, right? And that can keep the stock market up. If this starts to get too high, so if we start to see this 7% get down below 5, and this 3% start to get above 5, and it inverts, that's when kind of our radar goes up a little bit. We start to say, okay, are we soaking away too much of the profits from companies to give to wages? The other side of that is, even if that happens, as you can see, that has happened. Look at here in the 90s, right? In the 90s, you saw a huge reduction in the amount of profits that companies had. The 90s were the greatest stock market decade in the history of America. Right? It was literally the best 10 years there ever was, right? And companies were drastically less profitable because wages were going way up and they were reinvesting in themselves due to the dot-com bubble. So if the orange line comes down, it doesn't necessarily mean the market is tanking, especially if workers are raising their wages and those wages are getting spent in the economy. That could actually be positive for the stock market. So again, I think that one of the big worries people have is this sort of thing, if Democrats were to take all 3, both houses and the presidency. And unless that goes pretty far, because it is so far apart today. Now, again, could that shave a couple percentage points off the market? Absolutely. But there are some other ways, if the government is spending that money via the taxation, or if the employees are spending it because their wages are going up, that's not necessarily that bad. So if that inverts, our radar is up and we might start to, make some changes to your portfolios. But in the meantime, there's room there, right? Where I don't think it's it's an apocalypse by any means. I just thought this was interesting. I'll spend less than 2 minutes on this slide. I think had I polled everyone and said, hey, what is did in the early 2000s, did the U.S., you know, especially after the dynamicism of the dot-com era, right, where companies were innovating so fast, specifically in the U.S. and not in Europe, look at how much the percentage of share of labor was going to people in the U.S. versus in Europe. We were actually getting more, like a lot more, 57 to, you know, under 57 to over 61. So the U.S. workers were in way better shape back then, and the economy and the stock market were both good. So that's why I think that there is some room to raise. So a lot of people say, oh, if minimum wage goes up. Minimum wage will hurt small companies. It doesn't really affect big ones that much. And the big ones are all in the stock market. Small ones are not. You know, so I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying what's good for the economy or what's good for any individual person, but from a portfolio perspective, from your hard-earned money portfolio perspective, if that happens a little bit, it's not, we're not communist, we're not socialist. The market could do that and be fine if it is done properly.